purpose of this video is to show how to create another partition after installing the minimum install of CentOS 5. This will work with other Linux distributions that use logical volume management for the partitions. CentOS uses that by default when you install it. And this is really oriented more toward advanced users and system administrators, but there's certainly some value here for your everyday Linux user as well. There is value in separating your machine into different partitions to improve the overall performance of your machine. If nothing else, separating the applications from the data. So what I'm going to do just that with the minimum install of CentOS that we performed in the previous video. And I'm going to create a separate partition just for the home directory. I could have done this during the install, but I purposely skipped that so I could show how it's done post-install, because this is valuable skills for any system administrator working with CentOS. And anyway, without any further ado, I've rebooted the machine that has CentOS 5 with the same disk that I used to install the CentOS 5 operating system. And it's waiting for my input here, and I'm going to go into rescue mode for CentOS 5. So I'm going to press F5 for rescue, and then I need to type in Linux rescue and hit enter, and we'll go into rescue mode. And once we get in, it will ask me the language and default keyboard, and English for the language, US for the keyboard type. We don't need to start the network interface on the system. We could do that, but we don't need to, so I'm just going to hit tab and enter for no. And now it'll try to attempt to mount the drive that we installed CentOS on. We don't want to do that because we cannot resize partitions while they're mounted. Well, we can't shrink them while they're mounted, and that's what we need to do, is shrink the partition to create make room for a new partition. So I'm going to go ahead and skip this, and here we are. Now the problem is that when you skip that step, the rescue system here does not see your logical volumes, and so we need to be able to type in the commands to where it'll recognize those volumes, and then we can begin working with them. So the first command that we need to type in is LVM VG scan. Whoopsie. Hit enter. Okay. It did. You see the last line it outputted, found volume group VOL group 00 using metadata type LVM2. So it's found the logical volume group. Now we're going to activate the logical volumes in that group. So we type in LVM VG change -AY and hit enter. Now the logical volumes in the group are now active. So now the system sees the logical volumes, and we can begin working them. We can shrink the partition that we installed CentOS on, and to make room for a second partition, and we'll use that second partition for our data. So we want to type in LVM LVS to list the volumes in the group, and there they are. There's two of them. The second one listed there is actually the swap partition, and we're going to work. And the first one is where we install the operating system. So that's the one we're going to want to shrink. The first thing we want to do before we shrink any volume is we want to check the volume for errors. So we'll type in E2FSCK, and then we need the path for the volume. And the path is going to be /dev/mapper/v, capital V O L. You hit tab for command line completion, and it's 00. Oh, my mistake. It's E2FSCK-F/dev/mapper/capital V OL capital G ROUP 00 capital L OG capital V OL 00. That's the logical volume that we're wanting to do the file system check on. I'm going to give it just a few minutes for that to run. Since we just installed the operating system, it shouldn't have any errors. Doing this more as precautionary. If you use the system for any length of time and then do this, then the file system check becomes essential. Okay, we need to shrink the file system to a smaller size, just slightly smaller than what we're going to shrink the partition to. And the reason for that is so that when we shrink the partition after we shrink the file system, we don't end up losing data or shrinking the volume over to less than what the file system is. So we want to make sure we get this we shrink the file system small enough to where we can shrink the partition. So the first thing we want to do is resize /dev/mapper /vol 00, and currently we can see from the previous entry that it's about 7.12 gigabytes, and I want to shrink this down to about 5 gigabytes. So what I'm going to do is shrink it to 4G. Okay, it's done. Now the next thing we want to do is we want to shrink the volume. So we type LVM, LV resize, and then the path, device to the device for the partition that we're wanting to shrink, 00, and then dash size to the size we want to shrink it to. We're going to shrink it down to 5 gigabytes, slightly larger than what we shrunk the file system to, and hit enter. Warning us that may destroy our data. It won't, because we shrunk our file system smaller than the volume. Click Y, hit enter, and it's done. Okay, now at this point we're going to regrow the file system to the size, to the new size of the partition. And all we need to do for that is we type in resize to FS, and then the path /dev/mapper/vol, and this time we don't tell it how far to shrink it. It'll just automatically fill that partition. So we'll hit enter. Okay, now that's done. Now we're ready to create another partition.